The cello played long and low beneath the crystal lights, white ribbons cascading from the vaulted ceiling, carrying a sense of elegance tinged with something unspoken. Guests shimmered in tailored tuxedos and bespoke gowns, the clink of glasses mingling with carefully measured laughter. But William Hartman, CEO of Hartman Biotech, once the face of every financial magazine, stood still in a corner of the grand hall, eyes locked on the entrance, gripped by a feeling he couldn't quite name. The champagne glass in his hand remained untouched, cold. Yet his fingers had begun to warm, trembling slightly, as if his body knew something was coming before his mind caught up. And then, she entered. No fanfare, no spotlight. Maya Bennett appeared like she had never left his heart, only wandered far away, to return when he'd stopped preparing for the impossible. The black gown hugged her frame just right, not showy, but striking in its elegance. Her hair was swept up, revealing the soft line of her collarbone, and eyes that held stories he once knew. But what froze the air in place were the 3 children walking beside her. 1 girl, 2 boys, all the same age, and all with hazel eyes, the same shade he saw in the mirror every morning. William couldn't move. The storm inside him showed no expression, only a clenched jaw and a hard swallow, like forcing down a shard of glass. His heart didn't just skip, it nearly stopped. She didn't see him, or maybe she did, and chose not to look. Maya walked through the hall like it belonged to her, her presence composed and commanding. The children followed her in step, dressed in matching black shoes, polished, hair neatly done. They didn't shout, didn't fidget, didn't knock over a single glass of wine. They were the embodiment of something William had never dared imagine. He stepped back, brushing into a server carrying hors d'oeuvres. The server apologized, flustered. William barely nodded, his eyes never leaving Maya. This couldn't be real. Maya had once... No, he couldn't finish the thought. Because then, the memory returned like a tidal wave. His final night in Atlanta, the rushed text message, the silence of her apartment, and how her eyes had looked. The very eyes he'd tried to forget for the last 5 years. He turned away, walking quickly onto the balcony, trying to catch his breath. But the Chicago night air wasn't cold enough to slow his pulse. What had happened? She had children? 3? And they were his? He didn't know for sure, but his heart, despite everything, whispered an answer he couldn't deny. Elsewhere in the hall, Maya was discussing her keynote with the director of Children's Health Institute. Calm, composed, natural. No one would guess this woman had once been left behind while carrying triplets. "Can your daughter try our robotics program?" one guest asked. Maya smiled. Of course. Though Aaliyah's more into drawing. She says she only studies robots so she can sketch them better. Laughter followed. And William, standing just a few feet away, heard it all. He held his glass tighter, pulling out his phone as if to distract himself. But the screen only reflected the image of a thinner man, eyes lonelier than any other in the ballroom. He once believed success was everything, that $1 billion deal could secure the future. But now, standing across the room from the woman who once loved him beyond reason, and 3 children who bore pieces of him, William Hartman realized some things, once lost, can't be repurchased. He turned slowly, eyes finding Maya again. She looked up. This time, their eyes met. And in that frozen glance, the room disappeared. Just the 2 of them. And 3 questions that were never supposed to exist. You'll understand if you've ever loved someone so deeply that just one look from them made your heart stop. If you've ever lost something precious, only to see it shine again without you, you'll understand too. Leave a comment and share the moment that once took your breath away. And if you want to follow Maya and William's journey of rediscovery, healing, and a love rewritten, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes, love doesn't return to continue the past. It returns to rewrite the future, more honestly than ever. The rain had begun as a whisper that night, barely brushing against the high windows of their Atlanta penthouse. It wasn't loud, not yet, but the sky felt heavy, swollen with something unsaid. Maya stood by the window, one hand resting lightly on the curve of her stomach. 7 months. She could feel them now, her babies, shifting quietly, like stars turning in slow constellations beneath her skin. The apartment was unusually silent. Too silent. Not the kind of peace that brought rest, but the type that signaled something was unraveling. There was no music playing, no scent of her usual lavender candle, only stillness, and the faint echo of her breath. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look immediately. Instinct had changed in the last few weeks. She no longer reached for texts, hoping it was him. But something about the weight in the air pulled her eyes to the screen anyway. "We need to talk." William's 6 words. They didn't shout, but they landed like thunder. She sat down on the edge of the bed, fingers clenching the hem of her robe as if it might keep her steady. She stared at the message again, willing it to rewrite itself. It didn't. Of course it didn't. She found him on the balcony, just as the sky began to break open. He was standing still, shoulders squared, hands in the pockets of his tailored jacket. The jacket she'd given him last Christmas, when she was still making gingerbread and dreaming baby names. The city skyline spread out behind him, indifferent and cold. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. Or maybe he did hear, and didn't care to face her yet. "You couldn't wait until morning?" Maya's voice was low, careful. William exhaled, steadying himself. "I've accepted the offer." Her spine straightened. "The Zurich deal?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the distance. "It's done. I leave next week. The board is flying me out for the announcement." Maya blinked slowly, trying to align the timeline in her mind. "You're leaving, while I'm carrying your children." "All 3 of them," she added, her voice tightening. "I know," he said, almost gently. "But this is bigger than us." "No," she said, a crack forming beneath her words. "This isn't bigger than us. This is betrayal, dressed in ambition." For the first time, he turned to face her. His expression faltered, just slightly, a flicker of something that used to live between them. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always are." Tears rose before she could stop them. They didn't fall. Not yet. But they pressed against the inside of her eyes, hot and sharp. "You don't get to decide that," she whispered. Silence. Then she turned, walked to the elevator. Her hand hovered just a second over her belly before pressing the button. And as the doors slid shut behind her, she looked down and whispered, "You deserve more than this." 2 weeks later, under a rain-soaked sky, Maya gave birth to 3 premature babies. The delivery room was sterile, humming with quiet urgency. The NICU nurses moved with precision, whispers and beeping machines forming the soundtrack to the most terrifying and beautiful moment of her life. 3 cribs, 3 names she'd chosen alone: Aaliyah, Ezra, and Zion. They were so small, so quiet. Their skin is translucent, their breaths fragile and fast. She wasn't ready, but ready had nothing to do with it. She leaned over their incubators, her fingers brushing the plastic walls like a prayer. "You're loved," she whispered, repeatedly, like a lullaby. "You're safe. I've got you." Sometimes her voice cracked, sometimes it was steady, but it was always present. The hospital staff called her remarkable, tireless, brave. But at 2 a.m., sitting alone between two machines, she didn't feel brave. She felt broken, changed, and made new in a way that hurt. When a nurse asked gently if the father would visit, Maya didn't hesitate. "No," she said, adjusting the tiny socks on Ezra's feet. "He's on a different path." Her parents flew in to help, staying in shifts. Her father taped the triplets' drawings on her fridge back home. Her mother made soup, but she never had time to finish it. There were nights when Maya studied for exams with Zion's monitor buzzing in her ear, and mornings when she sterilized bottles while submitting clinical papers. Her life became an elegant, chaotic loop. Diapers, textbooks, heartbeats. There was no time to grieve William, only space to survive. But she did more than survive. She grew. By the triplets' second birthday, Maya was back in her white coat, a resident now. Some evenings, she paused outside the pediatric wing before entering to remind herself that she'd made it, that they had made it. Sometimes, after a long shift, she'd sit on the floor of their tiny apartment, with Ezra curled against her knee and Aaliyah flipping pages in a board book, and think, he missed this. He missed Zion's first laugh, the way Aaliyah used to hum herself to sleep, the time Ezra tried to eat Maya's stethoscope. He missed everything, and that was on him. She didn't speak his name, not out of spite, but it didn't belong in their story anymore. Not then. But fate never asks permission. And 5 years later, on a golden-lit night in Chicago, as her heels clicked across marble floors and her children held tightly to her hands, William Hartman stood still across the room, glass in hand, and watched the life he once left behind walk in without needing him at all. Bạn đã nói, hãy bắt đầu viết phân fra với độ dài khoảng 4.000 ký tự. Phong cách viết truyền ngôn tình, dùng từ ngữ khéo léo, tinh tế, thuyết phục khán giả. Cổ chùa lời kêu gọi hành động, viết bằng tiếng Anh Mỹ ChatGPT đã nói. Part fra, 3 hearts, 1 woman, and the quiet rising. The first time Maya held all 3 of them, her body trembled, not from fear, or exhaustion, or even pain, though she had endured more than she thought a person could. No, her hands shook because she realized something terrifying and magnificent all at once. These lives were entirely hers to protect. She was alone in that hospital room, bathed in the soft blue glow of the NICU monitors. The city outside moved in its usual rhythm, unaware of the miracle unfolding in a corner room where 3 premature infants lay breathing through machines, tiny fists curling in reflexes they hadn't yet learned to control. Aaliyah had the softest wail, like a whisper threaded through the wind. Ezra came out first, silent, but stubbornly clenching his jaw as if already bracing himself for the world. And Zion opened his eyes and stared straight ahead, like he'd seen something waiting for him on the other side. Maya watched them sleep through translucent walls, her fingers pressed to each plastic casing, like someone memorizing the shape of faith. "You are not a mistake," she whispered one night, her voice hoarse from hours without speaking. "You are my beginning." In the weeks that followed, Maya existed in fragments. Her body remained in the hospital, moving between formula measurements and oxygen levels. Still, her mind was already trying to stitch together the pieces of a life she wasn't prepared to lead. Not this soon. Not this alone. She learned to read pulse monitors as a second language, memorized the names of each night nurse, learned which lullabies soothed Aaliyah, which gentle tap made Ezra's breathing even, which story Zion's heart monitor seemed to calm. There were no visits from the father, no flowers, no whispered apologies. And still, she didn't break. Instead, she became a rhythm. 4 a.m., bottle prep. 6 a.m., medical rounds. Noon, coursework readings. Midnight, quiet, humming to 3 tiny chests, rising and falling inside warmed beds. She downloaded lectures onto her phone and played them through earbuds while feeding them, one by one. Typed essays on her laptop while her foot rocked a bassinet. Passed clinical exams with spit up on her scrubs and 3 pacifiers tucked into her coat pocket. One afternoon, her professor asked, not unkindly, "Dr. Bennett, do you ever sleep?" She smiled, soft but unreadable. "When they do." When the triplets turned 6 months, she moved out of her parents' house into a 2-bedroom walk-up near the hospital. The elevator didn't work half the time. The walls were too thin, but sunlight poured through the windows in the mornings, and that was enough. Maya converted the 2nd bedroom into a shared nursery. 3 small cribs lined beneath painted stars, a rocking chair by the window, shelves filled with books and soft toys. She decorated with things she could afford, hand-me-downs, thrift finds, and drawings taped to the walls. But to her, the room felt royal. Sometimes, when all 3 were napping, she'd sit in that rocking chair and watch the shadows play on their faces. It didn't matter that she hadn't worn makeup in weeks, or that her shoulders constantly ached. In those moments, she wasn't tired. She was anchored. "I may have done this backward," she whispered once, brushing Zion's cheek with her fingertip. "But I've never been more certain of anything." The years passed not quickly, but fully. Aaliyah was the first to speak. Her voice was sweet and confident, constantly narrating her world as if she were the star of a story she'd been waiting to tell. Ezra was quieter, observant. He liked puzzles and shapes, often lining his blocks in perfect rows before napping beside them like a tiny engineer. Zion had questions about everything. His favorite word was, "Why?" He asked it at least 30 times before lunch. They didn't know what they were missing, or who. Maya didn't lie, but she didn't volunteer either. She gave them facts, not fairy tales. "Our family is small, but mighty," she told them one evening over alphabet soup and crackers. "We may not have every piece, but we have what we need." And they believed her, because Maya made sure of it. In the quiet of her mind, there were still echoes, moments when the shadows stretched longer than usual, or Zion tilted his head just like William used to before asking a question. Something in her ribs would twist. She didn't reach out. Not once. Not for spite, but because she had chosen the life that required both hands to hold. And the truth was, he had let go first. Still, she sometimes wondered, in the privacy of sleepless nights, whether he ever thought of her, of them, of what he'd walked away from. Maybe he did, but maybe it didn't matter, because Maya wasn't raising them for anyone's redemption. She was raising them for joy, for resilience, for the possibility of becoming whole, even when life breaks you open. And as she zipped up Aaliyah's coat one early winter morning before walking them to preschool, Maya looked down at the 3 pairs of eyes staring up at her and saw not what she'd lost, but what she'd built. Without help, without shortcuts, without William Hartman. She kissed each of their foreheads, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the frost-tipped morning. No regrets, only movement forward. The ballroom gleamed like a sky turned upside down. Glass chandeliers hung in constellations, casting soft golden halos on the polished floor below. Guests moved between silk-draped tables, murmuring about research, funding rounds, AI-integrated medicine. The kind of talk that filled most nights like this with noise and ego. But tonight, the noise receded as soon as Maya walked in. The TechMed Global Conference invited her to be a keynote speaker. Not because she looked the part, though she did. Not because she carried the right last name. She didn't. She led a pediatric neurosurgeon's team to develop a new, minimally invasive technique for early neural correction in premature infants. This discovery made other physicians stop mid-sentence and recalibrate everything they thought they knew. Maya didn't walk in like someone who wanted to be admired. She walked in like someone who had nothing left to prove. Her emerald green gown skimmed the floor, hugging her frame with effortless elegance. Her hair was swept into a low knot. Her lips painted a quiet, resolute shade of rose. But it wasn't her appearance that drew attention. It was the calm gravity she carried, like someone who had already survived the fire and wasn't afraid of walking through it again. And flanking her, holding her hands, were three miniature shadows, Aaliyah, Ezra, and Zion. They were dressed like little diplomats. Black suits, shiny shoes. Aaliyah was in a tulle dress with silver sneakers and a plush rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Ezra held a tiny red race car. Zion wore a plastic astronaut badge proudly pinned to his lapel. "Mommy," Aaliyah whispered, wide-eyed as she took in the glittering ceiling. "Are all these people here for you?" Maya smiled, bending to tuck a curl behind her daughter's ear. "Some are, but mostly, we're here to talk about helping other children." The children nodded solemnly, as if that answered everything. And William Hartman stood somewhere across the room, watching, silent, frozen. He hadn't planned to attend the gala. He hadn't known she'd be there. At least, that's what he told himself when the invitation first arrived. It had been addressed to his company, not to him. But somewhere deep in his chest, something had stirred when he saw the keynote speaker's name. Dr. Maya Bennett. He hadn't recognized it immediately, not because it didn't sound familiar, but because in his world, people rarely changed names. They only changed titles. But when she stepped onto the stage that evening, and he saw her, he understood instantly. His chest tightened. He forgot what he was supposed to be doing. The tuxedo he wore suddenly felt too tight. The glass in his hand too full of questions. And then he saw them, the three children, and all the breath left his body. Triplets. He felt it before he counted them. Felt it in the mirrored curve of Aaliyah's smile, the stubborn lift in Ezra's chin. Zion cast a wide, wondering gaze into the world, as if everything held meaning. They were his. And yet, they weren't. Not really. Because he hadn't been there to watch them take their first steps, pick up crayons, or ask why 1,000 times in a row. He had been in Zurich, then Berlin, then Boston, building empires. He thought he was creating a legacy, but was missing the only legacy that would have mattered. Now, standing a few feet from them, his hands clenched uselessly at his sides, his wife, Serena, said something beside him, but her voice blurred into the background. She was radiant, poised, as always. But she wasn't the center of his gaze. Not tonight. Not anymore. Because Maya was speaking now. On stage, under lights that caught the soft edges of her face and turned her every word into something golden. She didn't talk about herself, not once. She spoke of children who fought silent battles in hospital rooms, of mothers who learned the language of machines before lullabies, of tiny hands wrapped around fingers and hope measured in milligrams. Behind her words was something more profound: the unsaid, the absence, the sacrifice. Applause rose like a wave when she finished, thunderous and rising from every corner of the room. Cameras flashed. People stood. But Maya nodded, stepped down, and returned to her children, never pausing to soak in the praise. William remained seated. His hands trembled in his lap. He didn't clap, not because he didn't want to, but because clapping felt too small a gesture for the woman who had built something he had walked away from. Later, while guests mingled near the refreshment tables and soft jazz hummed through the speakers, Maya stood near a tall window, silver curtains drawn back. The triplets sat at a low table nearby, munching on fruit skewers and pastries, whispering and giggling in their orbit. Maya laughed softly at something a colleague said, but her eyes scanned the room now and then, brief, subtle, unspoken. And then she felt it. Before she saw him, the quiet shift in the air, the weight of a gaze she hadn't felt in years. "Dr. Bennett," a voice behind her said. Her breath stilled. She turned, and there he stood, William Hartman, immaculate in his tuxedo, but unraveling behind his eyes. There was a pause, not in shock, but of recognition. It was as if the past had walked back into the present and asked to be acknowledged. "William," she said evenly. He offered a small, unsure smile. "You look well." She tilted her head. "You seem surprised. I didn't expect to see you here, let alone them." As if on cue, Ezra wandered over, a smear of chocolate at the corner of his mouth. He stared up at William, curious. "Mom, who's that?" Maya gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Someone I used to know." Aaliyah and Zion soon joined, peeking up at the man they didn't recognize, but somehow mirrored. William crouched instinctively. "Hi," he said. I'm William." "I'm Aaliyah," she said proudly. "That's Ezra. He's Zion." Zion tilted his head. "Are you Mommy's doctor?" William's throat tightened. "No, I used to know her too." A beat. Then, softly, Maya said, "This is William. He's someone important from my past." Aaliyah narrowed her eyes. "So you're not our dad?" The question cracked the air between them like glass. William looked at Maya. She gave him nothing. No nod. No hint of mercy. And yet, he knew this was his moment. He inhaled, shaky. "I am," he said quietly. "I'm your father." Ezra blinked. "Where have you been then?" William knelt lower. "I wasn't ready. I made a mistake. A huge one." Zion studied him for a long moment, then offered him the remains of his fruit skewer. "We share," he said. William's voice broke. "Thank you," he whispered. Maya stepped back, her voice calm, measured. "Kids, go finish your juice." They obeyed, glancing back once, uncertain but unafraid. When they were out of earshot, she turned to him. "You don't just get to appear and announce yourself." "I know," he said. "I didn't expect forgiveness. I just needed to see them. And you." "Well, you've seen us," she replied, calm and steady. "Now what?" He hesitated. But in that moment, under chandeliers and between champagne glasses and the music of futures once abandoned, he realized there would be no shortcuts. Only the long road back, and it wouldn't be paved with apologies. The air on the terrace was sharper than inside the ballroom, as if the night itself had no patience for pleasantries. String lights draped from the stone arches overhead, their glow soft and indifferent, casting shifting shadows across the polished floor. The lake beyond shimmered under moonlight, still and vast, much like the silence between them. Maya stood near the edge, arms folded, eyes focused on nothing. Her back was to him. Her posture didn't waver. William hesitated at the threshold. He had followed her out without thinking, just as he used to do, back when conflict felt easier to outrun than to resolve. But now he wasn't a man chasing forgiveness. He was standing at the border of a life he had once abandoned, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that there was still a gate he could knock on. He took a step forward. "You shouldn't have followed me," Maya said without turning. "I know," he answered quietly. "You don't belong here." "I know that too." She finally turned then, slowly, like someone deciding whether to look pain in the face or let it dissolve in her peripheral vision. Her eyes locked with his, clear, unforgiving. "You left me with no explanation," she said. "Not a goodbye. Not a real conversation. Just a text." His shoulders fell slightly. "I was scared." She blinked. "Of what?" William looked down, as if the truth lived somewhere in the stone beneath their feet. "Of becoming small. Of being trapped. I told myself I had to chase something bigger." Maya tilted her head, one brow lifting. "And you thought fatherhood would shrink you?" "I thought I'd lose myself before I'd even begun." She exhaled, steady. "You didn't just run from fatherhood, William. You ran from me. From the moment things became real. The merger, the press, Zurich. You made it all sound so noble, but it was cowardice in a suit." He didn't argue. "Not this time." "I thought it would secure a future," he said after a beat. "Ours. But not if it slowed you down." He swallowed hard. "I've watched interviews with you, read your papers. I didn't even know it was you at first. But once I did." He trailed off, voice cracking slightly. "God, Maya, I felt like a fool." "You were," she said, without venom, just precision. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "The night I went into early labor, I was alone," she continued. "No one to drive me. No one to hold my hand. I sat in a cold hospital bed listening to heart monitors scream every time one of them dipped below safety. Ezra needed oxygen. Aaliyah was underweight. Zion didn't cry right away. She didn't cry now either. Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled slightly where they were folded against her body. I watched them fight for breath. Then I went home, studied between feedings, pumped milk between lectures, passed boards with spit up on my shoes, and no sleep. I didn't have time to resent you. I had to become something I didn't recognize. Stronger, colder, faster, to survive." William's throat tightened. "I should have been there. But you weren't." Her words landed not as an accusation, but as absolute truth. Irrefutable, immovable. And yet, he started, unsure. "They're beautiful, whole. Everything I never deserved." Maya nodded slowly. "They are. Because I didn't let them carry your absence like a wound." William's gaze dropped to the terrace stones. "I didn't tell them your name," she added. "Not out of anger, but because I didn't want them asking questions I couldn't answer." He looked up again. "You gave them the truth. I gave them peace." Silence stretched between them, long, but not empty, heavy with all the time past, their lives in separate directions, and the quiet ache of what could never be undone. "I'd like to do something," he said after a long moment. "What kind of something?" He reached into the inside pocket of his suit and carefully pulled out a small folder. "A trust. For their education, medical support, future opportunities, no strings, not a step forward, just a gesture." Maya took the folder but didn't open it. "Why?" He looked at her, eyes steady now. "Because I owe them that. I owe you more than I can articulate. I spent years designing software to detect failing heart rhythms while ignoring the ones that mattered most." Before Maya could respond, the soft sound of footsteps interrupted them. Zion emerged from the doorway, holding a small daisy between his fingers, sleep still clinging to his face. "Mommy," he whispered. "Aaliyah says there's a bunny in the garden." Maya crouched instinctively, brushing a curl off his forehead. "We'll look for it in a minute, baby." Zion glanced at William and blinked up at him. "Are you Mommy's friend?" William knelt too, eyes warm but cautious. "I'm someone who hopes to be." The boy studied him for a beat, then offered the daisy with solemn grace. "It's for your suit. You look serious." William took it carefully, his fingers trembling. "Thank you, Zion." The boy nodded and wandered back inside. Maya remained crouched for a moment longer, staring after her son. Then she stood. "He doesn't understand what's happened," she said. "And maybe that's a blessing." "I don't want to confuse them," William said softly. "But if they ever want to know, I'll be there." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not promising you anything. I know. You walked away from something sacred. You don't get to rewrite that history with money or guilt." "I'm not trying to rewrite it," he said, voice quiet. "Just hoping to be allowed on the edges of whatever comes next." Maya folded her arms, eyes unreadable. "If this is just guilt, it won't last. But if it's real, if you're willing to stay quiet when needed and speak only when earned, then maybe." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. William nodded, shoulders still but no longer tense. "And you never," she added, "make them feel like an afterthought." "Never," he said, firm. For the first time, her stance shifted. Not forgiveness, but recognition. A space where possibility might be allowed, gently, to breathe. "They're everything to me, William," she said. "I know. I've built our life around their laughter. Don't be the shadow that dims it." "I won't." The air between them softened. Not warm, but no longer cold. Not closure, but perhaps permission. And as the lights from inside flickered across the terrace, Maya turned to leave. "You should go," she said. "I will. And if you mean what you say," she added, pausing only a second, "then start by listening." "I am." He watched her disappear into the silver light of the ballroom. This time, he didn't chase. He stayed, still, and listening. It wasn't the silence that unnerved him. William had grown used to silence. He'd built an entire world out of it. Silent offices, hotel suites, and flights where he stared out the window and convinced himself he was flying towards something meaningful. But this quiet that lingered after the gala was different. It followed him, into the car, onto the elevator. He went up into his high-rise apartment, which overlooked a city brimming with ambition, but not intimacy. Serena had fallen asleep before he returned. He didn't wake her. He just sat on the edge of their bed, tuxedo half undone. The flower Zion had given him still folded gently inside his breast pocket, like something far too fragile for the world he came from. The house was dark except for the soft pulse of the security panel by the door, and as the lights of downtown shimmered like artificial stars outside their bedroom window, William sat very still and replayed one moment again and again. Aaliyah's voice. "So you're not our dad?" He had answered, yes. But it was Maya's silence afterward that rang louder. Not bitter, not theatrical, just full. Full of boundaries, of years. Knowing that forgiveness, if it ever arrived, would not come with a bow. He didn't sleep. Not really. Just drifted in and out of thoughts, his hand occasionally brushing the edge of that little flower. 3 days passed. He told no one, said nothing. But something inside him had begun to rearrange itself, like furniture in a house long untouched, the kind of shift you only notice when the light hits it differently. He sat in board meetings and heard nothing, pushed aside reports and skipped 2 lunches. Serena noticed, of course, but didn't ask. Their relationship had been built on polished surfaces. They didn't dent easily, but they didn't deepen either. That night, he returned home and walked directly to the small office where he kept the personal things he rarely let anyone see. In a drawer beneath stacks of foundation reports and patent applications, there was a sealed envelope he had written nearly 5 years ago. To the children, if I ever deserved to know them. He never sent it, never even finished it. He sat down, unsealed the flap, and began again. But this time, he didn't write to make himself feel better. He wrote to tell the truth. Meanwhile, the rhythm of Maya's life continued without pause in Atlanta. The triplets had adjusted easily after the gala, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Children, she'd realized, had a way of absorbing shocks in silence, only to echo them later in surprising ways. Aaliyah began asking questions about the stars. Why did some stay and others disappear? Ezra, usually composed, started drawing new figures in his stick-figure family sketches. One stood off to the side, always watching. Zion, blunt as ever, asked one night at dinner, "If he's our dad, why don't we live with him?" Maya placed her spoon down gently and looked at them one by one. Families don't always live in one house. Sometimes we make homes from who shows up. And sometimes, she added, her voice careful, people come back late, but still want to help. They nodded, though she wasn't sure how much they understood, or how much she wanted them to. A week later, a package arrived. No name, no return address. Just a thin brown box left at the doorstep of Maya's row house in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood. She opened it with practiced caution, half from instinct, half from habit. Inside was a set of science kits. 3 were individually labeled in block handwriting that she hadn't seen in years. Aaliyah, build the stars. Ezra, code the future. Zion, ask every question. There was no note, but she recognized the script. 2 days later, a scholarship notification landed in her inbox from a foundation she'd never heard of. A new fund had been created, unnamed, anonymous, but explicitly tied to the educational future of 3 specific children. 3 names were listed: Aaliyah Bennett, Ezra Bennett, Zion Bennett. Maya sat at her desk for a long time after that, fingers resting on the keyboard, heart unusually still. He wasn't asking. He was giving, quietly, without spectacle. And for the first time since the night she gave birth, Maya didn't feel angry when his name drifted into her thoughts. She just felt unsure. That weekend, the triplets had a junior science fair at school. Maya packed their projects into the car. Cardboard models, paper presentations, glitter still clinging to Ezra's elbows, and drove them to the gymnasium with the calm precision of someone used to holding everything herself. She didn't notice the man standing near the far wall until Zion whispered, "He's here, William." Dressed, not in a suit, not trying to own the room, just present. He didn't approach. He didn't wave. He stood near the back, watching Ezra explain how recycled water systems worked in hospitals. He stayed long enough to hear Aaliyah describe her hand-drawn constellations, and Zion declared that he'd be a question scientist one day, because people need better answers. Maya saw all of it. But this time, she didn't look away. When it was over, the children ran to her, eyes bright, arms full of ribbons. "Did you see?" Ezra asked breathlessly. "I saw everything," Maya said, pulling them in. Later, while they loaded their things into the car, Zion looked over his shoulder. "Will he come next time?" he asked. Maya didn't answer right away, because she wasn't ready to name him either. Not yet. But as she looked toward the school steps and saw William still standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes meeting hers, not with desperation, but with something gentler, she knew the answer was no longer hers alone to give. She turned back to her children, adjusting the strap of Zion's backpack, and said, "Maybe." And maybe that word didn't feel like a boundary for the first time in years. It felt like a door. It started with a soft cough over breakfast. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Ezra had always been the sensitive one, easily irritated by dust, pollen, even the change in air pressure before rain. Maya had heard it a dozen times before. She gave him ginger tea and rubbed his back gently as he nestled into her side, sleep still clinging to his lashes, sleepless. "You'll be fine," she murmured, kissing the crown of his head. "Just need a quiet day." But by mid-afternoon, the cough had deepened into something uneven. His breath came in fast, short pulls. His lips lost their color. His small shoulders moved too much, as if every breath had to be earned. The sunlight outside was golden, soft, lazy. Maya's world narrowed to the sound of her son struggling to breathe. There was no panic in her movements, just a swiftness sharpened by years of practicing calm under pressure. She bundled Ezra in a hoodie, spoke quietly to Aaliyah and Zion, called her mother for help, and had him in the car within minutes. The pediatric emergency line played through her speaker as she drove, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back to touch Ezra's knee, reassuring him without words. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, wide-eyed and trusting. It was always like this. Children didn't ask whether their parents were scared. They believed they wouldn't let anything bad happen, and Maya wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. The hospital felt strangely familiar and foreign at once. Bright, sterile corridors, the hum of machinery. Nurses move with quiet precision. But Maya wasn't the doctor this time. She was the mother. And that changed everything. They ushered Ezra into a room quickly, administered oxygen, started an IV. Maya stood by the side of the bed, her white coat traded for jeans and a sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon. She watched the rise and fall of her son's chest, now steady but shallow. Her medical mind assessed symptoms, labored rhythms, and the slope of his rib cage as he inhaled. But her mother's heart, her human heart, kept time with the monitor's beeping. "Reactive airway," the pediatrician confirmed. "We've caught it early. He's going to be okay." Maya nodded. She knew. but knowing and feeling were oceans apart. Aaliyah and Zion were in the family room with a social worker, crayons in hand, juice boxes waiting on a tray. Maya's mother had arrived to stay with them, but Ezra refused to let go of Maya's hand. His fingers curled around hers, even in sleep. She sat by his bedside, forehead resting near his pillow, breathing in rhythm with his machines. And then, a voice behind her, low, uneven. "Is he okay?" She turned, startled. William stood in the doorway, no suit, no curated confidence, just a man out of breath, eyes wide with something almost like fear. "What are you doing here?" she asked, not coldly, just stunned. He stepped forward, slowly, holding his hands up, as if words might not be enough. "I have someone watching the scholarship alerts." When the hospital admitted Ezra, his name flagged the system. She blinked. "You have a tracker on them?" "Not like that," he said quickly. "Not to monitor. To protect. From afar." She stared at him. "That sounds," she said softly, "like something a man says when he wants to feel less guilty about being absent." William didn't flinch. He looked past her, toward the small boy in the bed, breathing, pale, tethered to machines. "Can I sit?" he asked. She didn't answer, just shifted slightly, making space. He crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair beside hers. The daisy Zion had given him at the gala was folded between pages in his wallet. It fluttered slightly as he adjusted. "I never imagined this part," he said, voice low. The fear, the smallness of it. Maya didn't look at him. She looked at Ezra. "It's constant," she replied. "Even when they're fine, you wonder if you'll know when they're not." William leaned forward slightly, not touching, just watching. His breath was uneven. "What happened?" Maya explained quietly how Ezra's lungs had always been fragile, how the air had shifted, how the signs crept in. "Sometimes," she finished, "it takes hours. Sometimes it takes minutes." William nodded slowly. "He's strong." "They all are," she said. A beat. Then Ezra stirred slightly, not awake, just shifting. William froze. "Can I?" Maya hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached down and guided Ezra's small hand into William's. The boy didn't open his eyes, but his fingers instinctively curled around William's thumb. And William, who had held billion-dollar contracts, golden pens, and crystal trophies, held that tiny hand like it was the only thing that ever truly mattered. His breath broke. Maya turned away, giving him the moment. They sat like that for nearly 30 minutes. No words, just presence. Outside the room, Aaliyah and Zion returned with their grandmother, carrying coloring books and stuffed animals. Zion tugged at Maya's coat. "Can I go see Ezra now?" "He's sleeping," Maya said gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. "But someone else is here too." Zion peeked inside. His gaze found William. "Oh," he said. "Dad's back." Maya's breath caught. "Why'd you call him that?" Zion shrugged. "He looks like us." Aaliyah approached next. "Will he stay this time?" Maya's voice cracked. "I don't know yet." Inside, William heard every word. He didn't react. Not with a smile, not with words. Just sat quietly, his thumb still caught in Ezra's small, trusting grasp. Later, when he rose to leave, he turned to Maya. "I'm not trying to claim them," he said. "I just want to be where I can help." Maya looked at him. "And what if they start needing you?" He paused. "Then I'll be there," he said. even if it's only from the shadow. She studied him for a long moment, then whispered, "Shadows can be dangerous when they overstay." He gave a small, broken laugh. "Then I'll wait for the light." He left quietly, but the imprint of him, of that moment, of that small hand in his, stayed long after the door closed, and Maya stood alone by Ezra's bedside, wondering when the fear of losing something had begun to blend seamlessly with the fear of letting it back in. The house was quiet again. Ezra had come home 2 days earlier, his energy still lower than usual, but his smile intact. The color had returned to his cheeks, and so had the way he curled up beside Maya during bedtime stories, asking for just one more page before sleep claimed him. Zion had made it his mission to monitor Ezra's breathing with a toy stethoscope, while Aaliyah taped a hand-drawn "Get Well Soon" banner above his bed in rainbow letters. Maya moved through the week like a woman trained for motion. The clinic, the house, the children's lunches packed in neat rows. Her exhaustion threaded through her limbs, but she ignored it. She always did. What she didn't ignore, couldn't ignore, was the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was the soft change in the children's questions. The way they mentioned him now, not as the man from the gala, but as someone slightly less distant. Ezra said it first, quietly, while tracing a pattern on the fogged window during a rainy afternoon. "I liked it when he was at the hospital." Maya was in the kitchen, cutting strawberries. She didn't respond immediately, not with words. "Did he stay?" Ezra asked. Maya dried her hands on a dish towel and walked over. "He stayed," she said. Ezra nodded, as if that were enough. And for now, it was. The next morning, as Maya moved through her usual routine, packing backpacks, setting out vitamins, reviewing her surgery schedule, something on the fridge caught her eye. It was new. A fresh drawing was taped gently to the side near the water dispenser. 5 stick figures, drawn in thick crayon. One had a stethoscope. That one was her. Aaliyah always drew Maya with the purple marker and the longest eyelashes. 3 more miniature figures, all wearing capes, arms outstretched like superheroes. Ezra, Zion, Aaliyah, and the 5th stood slightly to the side. A man, in simple blue, with short lines drawn near his eyes. Smile lines, maybe. Not entirely in the group, but not outside it either. In large crooked letters, a small arrow above him read, "Maybe Dad." Maya stood still. Her breath caught in a way that surprised her. She didn't remove it, didn't ask who'd drawn it. She just stood there, arms crossed, a soft ache blooming somewhere beneath her ribs. Saturday morning arrived with sunlight and a crispness in the air that made the triplets leap out of bed before Maya could even pour her coffee. The museum downtown opened a new exhibit, robotics and pediatric medical technology, and Ezra had been discussing it for days. He'd even sketched what he called preliminary blueprints for how to improve the mechanical teddy bear featured in the commercial. "Can we go?" "Please, Mommy, can we go now?" Zion had asked. Shoes on the wrong feet, jacket zipped to his chin. So they went. Maya expected crowds and chaos, maybe the occasional tantrum from overtired toddlers. What she didn't expect, what she hadn't prepared herself for, was the familiar figure leaning slightly against the wall by the entrance to the Pediatric Innovation Wing. William. He looked up when he saw them, not surprised, not overstepping. Just there, present. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said quickly. "I can leave if—" Maya cut him off with a single nod. They're happy. That was enough. Inside, The triplets darted between displays. Aaliyah gravitated toward a screen that let her build her avatar doctor. Zion was fascinated by a robot arm that stitched tiny mock sutures into foam. Ezra stood in awe before the robotic teddy bear, his mouth slightly open, hands twitching with the urge to redesign it already. William kept his distance, but not coldly. When Ezra finally turned to him, eyes glowing with excitement, he asked, "Do you know how this works?" William crouched beside him, gesturing gently to the display. "A little, but I bet you could figure out more than I could." Ezra smiled, proud. Zion leaned toward Maya. "He's smart." "I noticed," she answered softly. They didn't plan lunch, but when the triplets pleaded to sit outside in the courtyard with the picnic William just happened to bring, the decision was made for them. Fruit, sandwiches, juice boxes with cartoon labels. Nothing elaborate, but the care was obvious. Maya didn't say much during the meal. She watched instead. Ezra leaned into William's side without realizing it. Watched Aaliyah correct his knock-knock joke with better timing. Watched Zion press his hand to William's shoulder, asking, "Can you come next time too?" Afterward, Maya pulled Aaliyah aside as they packed up the remnants of lunch. "Sweetheart, we don't know yet," she said. "He's still learning how to be around. That takes time." Aaliyah nodded solemnly. "But he's trying hard." Maya didn't respond, not with words, because something inside her, quiet but undeniable, knew Aaliyah was right. That evening, after the kids had fallen asleep in a tangle of museum brochures and marker-stained socks, Maya stepped onto the back porch with a cup of lukewarm tea. William joined her without a word. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking. "I'm not trying to take anything," he said after a while. "Just trying to be something." Maya didn't turn. "You used to want the world." He exhaled a tired laugh. "Turns out it's quieter than I thought. And lonelier." She sipped her tea, then set it down. "You weren't there when they took their first steps, or their first fevers, or when Aaliyah decided to color the walls because she thought the living room needed more sparkle." "I know. But you're here now." He nodded. "If you'll let me be." She looked at him then, thoroughly. "You don't get to be anything unless they invite you in. You understand that?" "I do." She paused, then added, "They're not waiting for you to be perfect. They're just waiting for you to stay." His voice softened. "Then I will." They stood a little longer, the night stretching before them, uncertain but not unwelcome. And inside, taped gently to the fridge, was a drawing of a family that wasn't finished, but might be starting to take shape. The offer came on a quiet Wednesday. Maya had just returned from her afternoon rounds at the hospital. The house was unusually still. Aaliyah was reading on the couch. Zion lay belly down on the floor, building a spacecraft out of cereal boxes. And Ezra was napping, the warmth of his breath fogging the window pane beside him. An envelope lay on the kitchen table between unpaid field trip permission slips and a coupon flyer she never remembered signing up for. Heavy, cream-colored, embossed with a gold seal she instantly recognized. St. Elizabeth's University Hospital, Zurich. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. Opening it might open something not entirely ready to be named. The triplets had only just begun to speak his name out loud, carefully, like it might vanish if said too freely. William. He had been more present than not lately, quietly orbiting, never overreaching. Sometimes it was science kits arriving by mail. Sometimes it was him, waiting outside the school gate after Ezra's chess club, his hands tucked into the pockets of a coat that no longer tried to impress. He didn't make declarations. He showed up. And now, this envelope. A chance Maya had dreamed of back when she was stitching together academic papers in the dim light of NICU monitors. Back when she believed Zurich was a destination, not a decision. She opened it. Full scholarship, research leadership position, faculty track, 12 months, support for dependents, housing, education transition covered, everything she'd once wanted. But she no longer existed in a world where her choices only belonged to her. Two days passed before she told the children. They were eating dinner, chicken and rice, mismatched placemats, Ezra humming softly under his breath, and she said it gently, like a pebble into calm water. "We might have the chance to live somewhere new," she said, watching their faces. Zion's fork paused mid-air. "Like new, like the apartment down the street?" "No, baby," she said, smiling faintly. "Father, a city called Zurich, in Switzerland." "Does it snow there?" Aaliyah asked instantly, her eyes already glittering. "Lots." Ezra blinked. "Would we take our beds?" Maya laughed softly. "No, but all your books, your toys, and your jackets. It's colder than Atlanta." They accepted it as children do when the world still feels movable, as something adventurous, not irreversible. But long after bedtime stories and dishes were done that night, Maya stood in the hallway, staring at the sealed envelope again. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a test. She met William the next day at a quiet cafe tucked beneath a row of dogwood trees that had already started to bloom. He was already seated when she arrived, a single cup of coffee before him, untouched. "Switzerland," he said when she sat down. "I heard." "How?" "A colleague on the board of the foundation." He hesitated. "Is it true?" "Yes." He nodded. "It's everything you've worked for." "I haven't said yes." His eyes narrowed gently. "Why not?" Maya wrapped her hands around her mug but didn't drink. "Because the moment I say yes, you disappear again." He looked pained. "I wouldn't. Wouldn't you?" Her voice didn't accuse, but it didn't retreat either. "This time, they'll remember. They'll feel the absence. I won't protect you from it." "I wouldn't vanish," he said quietly. "I'd figure it out. I can work from anywhere. Reshape my role." "Reshape your empire? If that's what it takes." Maya stared at him, hard. "You can't just say things, William," she whispered. "You have to show them. Not with gifts, not with plans, with presence, with follow-through." "I'm ready," he said. Her expression didn't soften. "It's not about what you want anymore. It's about what you're willing to withstand. The long days, the silence, the inconvenience, the exhaustion." He nodded. "Then give me the chance to prove I can." That night, she stood in the triplets' bedroom, the glow of their string lights warming the space with quiet magic. Books were scattered across the floor. Ezra's latest robot drawing was taped to the bookshelf. Aaliyah's journal cracked open beside her pillow. Zion was snoring softly under his blanket with one sock off, as usual. It was the life she had built. Deliberate, steady. And yet, progress, she had learned, didn't always mean walking alone. Sometimes it meant letting someone walk beside you, not to hold your weight, but to match your steps. She didn't sleep much. By morning, the email to Zurich had already been written, but she didn't send it. Not yet, because she still needed to know if William would show up. Not at the big moments, but the ordinary ones. The spilled juice, the forgotten lunchbox, the temper tantrum about mismatched socks, the things that mattered. Later that week, he appeared on her doorstep, not with flowers or apologies, but with a folder, a lease agreement for a short-term apartment in Zurich, a quiet consulting position lined up, no press, no announcement, just plans. He handed it to her and said nothing. She opened it, read every line. "Are you doing this?" she asked. "I told you," he said. "I'm not disappearing. And you're okay not being in control?" "I never was," he answered. "That was the lie I chased." She didn't smile, but her silence no longer held sharp edges. That night, she didn't mention him to the children, didn't promise anything, but she noticed how Aaliyah asked if the museum had robots in Zurich, the way Ezra practiced saying Guten Tag with a sticky note on the fridge. Zion asked if dads could visit on holidays. They were beginning to believe in new patterns. Maya watched them, tiny, brave hearts adapting again, and realized something terrifying and beautiful. They were no longer afraid of hope, and maybe, just maybe, neither was she. Zurich welcomed them with snow. The morning they landed, it fell thick and soft, settling on rooftops and trams like powdered sugar. Aaliyah pressed both hands to the airport glass, eyes wide as the flakes danced in spirals. Zion tried to catch one on his tongue before they even reached the taxi stand, and Ezra clutched his robot plush against his chest, as if it were a compass, guiding them into something unknown. The apartment was smaller than their Atlanta home, but light poured through tall windows with pale wooden frames. The walls were bare, waiting. The fireplace flickered in the corner like a quiet greeting. There was no grand ceremony, no dramatic shift, only 3 small voices echoing through empty rooms, running from hallway to hallway, calling dibs on window views and arguing over which corner was best for a reading nook. Maya stood in the middle, one hand still on her suitcase, letting the sounds wash over her like music from a life she had almost been too tired to imagine. She didn't speak. She just breathed. The first few days moved in fragments. Grocery runs, school tours, local SIM cards, pediatrician referrals, translating everything from milk labels to metro maps. Maya balanced it all with the precision of someone who had long ago learned how to make the unfamiliar feel safe. But there were moments when Aaliyah would grip her hand a little tighter, crossing a street, or when Ezra would whisper, "I miss Grandma's kitchen." When Maya wondered whether the move had been selfish, not for her ambition, but for hope, because hope meant trusting that this new chapter could hold them all, not just her. William didn't intrude. He'd texted once upon landing. Here, in the background, no expectations. And he meant it. He didn't call, didn't knock. But books began arriving in the mail. German-English readers, science puzzles, a snow globe wrapped in brown paper with a handwritten tag. For the nights when home feels far. Zion asked who it was from. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. She knew they'd already begun guessing for themselves. One Thursday afternoon, EMTT, Ezra, came home with a paper from school and an unusual glow behind his eyes. "We had to write about someone who inspires us," he said, holding up a slightly wrinkled page with a gold star in the corner. Maya read the words slowly. He had written, "I chose 2 people. My mom, because she fixes brains, and William, because he fixes stuff with computers. They both help people, just in different ways." She paused mid-sentence, her heart tightening in that achingly familiar way. I told the teacher it still counts, even if he doesn't live with us, Ezra added, his voice matter-of-fact. Maya kissed the top of his head and didn't speak for a while. The triplets had a Saturday nature class at the international school that weekend. While they bundled themselves into puffy jackets and mismatched mittens, Maya saw him from the window. William, standing just beyond the school fence, not watching them, watching the trees sway in the late winter wind, lost in thought. She met him outside after the children were led away in a chorus of boots and scarves. "They're adjusting well," she said. He turned. His expression softened when he saw her. "Because of you." She folded her arms, unsure if she wanted this conversation or had merely walked into it. "Maybe a little because they believe in second chances," she added. He didn't answer, just stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, silence hanging between them like something earned. After a while, he said, "I don't want to confuse them, but I'd like to be part of the ordinary. Drop-offs, recitals, birthday candles, whatever makes sense." Maya considered that. "As long as you remain consistent." He nodded. "I've learned that love doesn't just show up when it's convenient. It stays when it's hard." A week later, the school hosted a weekend project showcase. William arrived early, stood in the back corner without drawing attention, and didn't move even when Ezra spotted him and waved like he was waving at the sun. "Come see what I built!" Ezra shouted, dragging him to a table covered in cardboard, wires, and plastic gears. Zion tugged at his coat, insisting he see his soil layers diorama next. Aaliyah held up her notebook, beaming. "I wrote about the heart, like Mommy, but mine has glitter." William knelt beside them, listening, asking questions, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't quite jokes. And Maya watched from the back of the room, hands folded, her heart steady for the first time in a long time. This wasn't a reunion. It was something slower, surer, a reintroduction. They walked home afterward, the five of them, down narrow cobblestone paths wet with melted snow. The triplets were chattering in three directions, arms swinging, their small backpacks bumping into William as they insisted he hold at least one of their art projects. At a traffic light, Aaliyah paused. "Mom?" she asked, clutching Maya's arm. "Is it okay if I start calling him Dad again?" Maya blinked, then swallowed. "If that feels right to you," she said softly. "Yes." Aaliyah nodded, her curls bouncing. "I think he's trying hard enough now." Maya didn't respond, just reached for her hand and held it tight. Across the street, the light turned green. They walked on, together. No grand promises, no declarations, just small hands, steady steps, and the sound of winter softening into something almost like spring. Zurich was unusually silent that morning. It wasn't the kind of silence that unsettled. It was the quiet that came from snow settling gently on rooftops, from radiator heat humming through old pipes, from children still bundled in blankets upstairs, lost in dreams of robots and glittery volcanoes. Maya stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with coffee she hadn't yet tasted. The light through the windows was soft, filtered through clouds and frost, and in its haze, the world outside looked like a half-finished painting. There was a letter on the counter. Not a bill, not a school notice. A letter, handwritten, folded twice and addressed to her in familiar, steady handwriting. She had found it tucked between Ezra's homework folder and a box of William's favorite tea that had quietly appeared in the pantry weeks ago. She hadn't opened it yet. Instead, she just stared at it as the kettle hissed on the stove and her thoughts swirled somewhere between caution and curiosity. It had been almost 3 months since the move. 3 months of settling into rhythms that still felt borrowed. 3 months of learning to translate simple phrases at the pharmacy counter. 3 months of mornings when Ezra forgot where the spoons were. And Aaliyah whispered, "I wish I could sleep in my old bed," before immediately changing the subject. 3 months of watching William try. He came to the school concerts, the dentist appointments, the emergency runs for glue sticks and cough syrup. He'd learned to braid Aaliyah's hair badly, but with enthusiasm. He'd memorized the bedtime rotation and knew Ezra preferred lullabies whispered rather than sung. But Maya remained careful. She didn't give names to things that hadn't proven themselves. Didn't label a rhythm as love until it had weathered more than a season. Still, something was shifting. Like the way Zion had stopped asking if he'd leave again, or how William no longer stood at the edge of moments, waiting for permission, but instead reached out quietly and gently, as if knowing trust wasn't given with grand gestures, but earned in slices of time. She opened the letter when the kettle finally clicked off. It was short. No declarations, no apologies. Just a memory. There was a night, years ago, before you told me you were pregnant, when I found you asleep on the couch with Ezra's ultrasound picture pressed to your chest. I remember kneeling there, wanting to wake you, but not knowing how to say anything without unraveling. I was scared then, of not being enough, of failing at something that mattered more than algorithms or success. I failed anyway. But I never forgot that moment. Not the photo. Not the way your hand cradled your stomach in your sleep. Not the peace on your face. I see you now. And I still don't have the right words. But I'm learning to stay long enough to find them. No signature. Just that. A small offering. A memory shared like a bridge. That afternoon, Maya walked alone through the city's old quarter. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind a network of glistening puddles that reflected the pastel buildings and crooked balconies above. She paused at a cafe window where children pressed their noses to the glass, laughing at the steam shapes they made with their breath. Inside, an older couple shared a pastry, passing it back and forth without speaking, a kind of practiced tenderness between them, a language of gesture, of presence. Maya watched them for a long time, not because she envied them, but because she saw in them something rare. Stillness. A kind of quiet is earned only after surviving the noise. Later that evening, William arrived with a bag of groceries and a half-thawed chicken he claimed he'd intended to roast. He stumbled a bit, dropping a bundle of celery on the floor. Maya bent to pick it up, their hands brushing briefly, and for a moment, neither moved. She looked at him. Looked. He had stopped trying to impress her weeks ago. Now he tried to be known. "What?" he asked, gently. She shook her head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything unsaid, gathering like warmth behind her ribs. That night, when the kids were finally tucked in, and Maya had just finished washing the last plate, she stood beside him at the sink, sleeves rolled, water cooling. "You left me," she said quietly, "and I carried that absence like a second spine for years." William set the towel down. "I know, you don't get to erase that. I'm not trying to." She turned to him, eyes steady. "Then why now?" "Because," he said, voice thick, "I finally realized that no matter what I achieve, if I'm not part of the life I walked away from, it all rings hollow." Maya leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. I've raised them alone. I see that. They're strong. They get that from you. And tired. They don't see it, he said, but I do. She looked away, jaw tightening. Why did you write that letter? Because it was the one thing I never said out loud, and I thought maybe it would matter that I remembered. For a long moment, the kitchen was silent, except for the faint clock ticking above the stove. Then Maya whispered, I don't know what we are. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her hand, just answered softly, Neither do I. But I'm willing to stay in the question. And somehow, that was the first honest beginning they'd ever had. The snow didn't return. By early March, Zurich's rooftops had begun to shed their frosted silence, leaving behind streaks of damp slate and puddles that reflected light unexpectedly. The city softened, not just in temperature, but in tone. Sidewalk cafes started pulling their chairs out again. Fresh tulips appeared in baskets at the corner grocer. And in their modest second-floor apartment, windows were cracked open for the first time in months. It was subtle, the way seasons shifted. And perhaps that's why it caught Maya off guard. How something as unassuming as morning sunlight on hardwood could feel like the beginning of something entirely new. One morning, she stood in the kitchen with a soft robe tied at her waist, watching Aaliyah quietly concentrate over a coloring book at the table. Zion was in the other room, trying to fold paper airplanes like the boy next to him in class, and Ezra was asking the toaster why it always burned his waffles. Their life had found a rhythm, and that rhythm now included William. Not loudly, not in sweeping gestures, but in the details. He picked the kids up from school every Tuesday when her shifts ran late. He knew Ezra preferred apple slices with peanut butter, but without the skin. He'd learned how to braid Aaliyah's hair. Not just one braid, but 2 French plaits, neat and even, with no stray strands. Zion trusted him enough now to ask for help when his experiments didn't work. But Maya still hadn't answered the quiet question hanging between them. And William didn't press. On a Saturday in mid-March, she found him on the living room floor, surrounded by colored pencils, glue sticks, and the beginnings of a large cardboard castle. They said I could only help if I didn't give adult opinions, he explained, looking up with streaks of green marker on his cheek. Maya sat on the arm of the couch. She watched the scene unfold. Ezra gluing something upside down. Aaliyah explaining that her flag design represented justice, and Zion giving serious instructions, as if constructing a fortress meant securing world peace. William was focused, but not anxious. Present, but not performative. She noticed how he didn't try to lead, didn't correct. He followed their pace. When he finally stood up to stretch, Maya handed him a cloth to wipe the marker off his face. "You're doing all right?" she said, almost without thinking. He smiled. "It's the castle. They've accepted me as their royal servant." She laughed, soft and quick. "Don't let it go to your head." He didn't. He never did. Later that night, when the apartment had quieted, and the castle stood proudly in the middle of the living room, like a monument to chaos and creativity, Maya found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the kitchen, only to find barefoot William standing at the window with a glass of water. She paused, startled by his presence. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes calm. Too quiet. Maya poured herself a glass, leaned against the counter, and they stood there, saying nothing. Outside, a tram passed, its lights dragging long shadows across the snowless street. After a moment, he asked, "Are you still waiting for me to mess up?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "No. Then what are you waiting for?" Maya looked down at the rim of her glass, tracing it slowly with one finger. I'm waiting to see if this version of you lasts when the hard parts return. He nodded. That's fair. She exhaled. You're different now, she said quietly. Not in the big ways, in the small ones. I had to lose a lot before I realized what mattered. Silence returned, but it wasn't cold. Spring arrived gently in Zurich. The triplets began leaving their jackets unzipped. Maya started cooking lighter meals: grilled fish, cucumber salad, lemon tart. The apartment smelled of rosemary and sun-dried laundry, and William spent one whole afternoon assembling a bookshelf with Ezra, while Zion insisted on alphabetizing their picture books. One night, after the kids had fallen asleep mid-story time, Maya stepped into the hallway and found William folding a blanket with exaggerated care. You're trying too hard, she said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up. Am I? She tilted her head. It's not a complaint, just an observation. He folded the last corner. I don't know how to show I want to be here. Then maybe don't show it. Just be here. William hesitated, then slowly nodded. And for the first time, Maya realized she wasn't holding her breath. She was beginning to believe it too. A few days later, Maya received a letter from the hospital board, an invitation to extend her fellowship into a permanent position. It was the kind of offer she would have once celebrated with champagne, a rare evening off, and a phone call to the one who had long ago stopped answering. Now, the only person she wanted to tell was already waiting in the living room, assembling a puzzle with Ezra. She stood in the hallway watching him, the unopened envelope in her hand, and something inside her heart stirred. Not a question, but a shift. She no longer feared what came next, because for the first time, the future felt like something she didn't have to hold up alone. And though she hadn't said the words yet, hadn't named the feeling, it was already there, unfolding quietly, like spring beneath the snow. It was the kind of Sunday that slipped through your fingers, slow, hushed, tinged with early sunlight that filtered through linen curtains like an invitation to rest a little longer. In the Hartman-Bennett household, breakfast had stretched well past noon. The kids were still in pajamas, syrup in their hair, and William was trying, and failing, to win a card game against Zion, who insisted on changing the rules mid-round with dramatic flair. Maya watched them from the hallway, her coffee gone cold in her hands. It was a tableau she hadn't dared dream of a year ago. 3 giggling children, a man she once couldn't look at without wincing, now wiping syrup off Ezra's cheek with the back of his thumb. Everything had begun to feel steady, predictable even. And that was the exact moment life decided to knock again. The email came in at 2:17 p.m. from an Atlanta address she hadn't seen in years. Subject line: Conference, guest request. Urgent response needed. Maya opened it without thinking. It was from Dr. Claudine Hartwell, her former mentor at Grady Memorial Hospital, a woman both revered and feared in medical circles. The tone was warm, direct, and curious enough to set something on edge. Maya, I'll speak at the Zurich Neurovascular Congress in April. I'd like to include your current fellowship as a case study. I also understand that William Hartman resides in Zurich. Would love to invite him to the joint keynote. Let me know if you're both available. She reread the paragraph twice. It wasn't the invitation that made her pulse tick upward. It was how her mentor had mentioned William, as if the past wasn't layered in scars, as if the two of them had always been colleagues instead of the tangled history they had. She looked across the room at him, still laughing, still unaware, and Maya realized. The version of him that Claudine remembered. The man who had once walked away from everything was no longer standing in her living room. But the question burned just beneath her skin. What would happen when the world that knew their past collided with the life they were building now? She waited 2 days before telling him. They were washing dishes together, shoulder to shoulder at the kitchen sink, the kids upstairs arguing over whose storybook had the better dragon. "I got an email from Claudine Hartwell," Maya said, rinsing a bowl. William stiffened, only slightly, but she felt it. "She's coming to Zurich for the Congress," she continued. "Wants to feature the fellowship. Asked if you'd join the keynote." He set the plate down, a little too carefully. "That's unexpected. She knows you're here." He met her gaze. "Are you worried?" Maya hesitated. "Not about your work, about your past." He dried his hands with a dish towel, quiet for a long time. "She was there when I left," he said finally, "when everything went sideways. I never gave her a reason. I didn't even give you one." Maya turned to him, arms crossed, heart suddenly heavier. "Why did you leave?" she asked, for the first time without anger, just clarity. "Back then, before the babies, before Zurich. Why did you walk away without looking back?" He didn't rush the answer. Instead, he leaned back against the counter, eyes fixed on the tile floor, as if searching for a version of himself he barely recognized. "I was terrified," he said, "of failing, of becoming my father, of giving you less than you deserved. I thought if I left before I ruined it, at least you'd hate me instead of resenting what we built." Maya let the words settle. "You thought fear was protection?" He nodded, slow and grim. "Turns out, fear doesn't protect. It just delays the hurt. For everyone." She looked at him, seeing not the man who had left, but the one who had stayed this time, who had returned with both hands open. After a beat, she said, "You should do the keynote. You're sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I think you need to speak as the man you are now, not the man you were then." The day of the keynote arrived faster than expected. They didn't arrive together. He went early, a tailored charcoal suit offset by quiet nerves. She arrived later with her colleagues, trying not to notice the way her stomach fluttered like it had back when they first met. The auditorium was packed. Maya sat 3 rows back, behind a row of neurologists from Berlin, and next to a woman who whispered that she'd once studied under Hartman at MIT before he disappeared. When William took the stage, the murmurs quieted. He adjusted the mic. No slides, no notes, just his voice. "I used to believe data could save lives," he began. "I built systems, coded models. I thought control was the key. Then life humbled me. It showed me that the heart has logic. And sometimes, healing requires more than what we can predict." The room fell into a hush so complete that even the translators paused. "I lost time," he continued. "I lost trust. I lost the people I should have fought hardest to keep. But life gave me a second chance, not because I deserved it, but because someone believed I could still learn how to show up." His eyes flicked toward the 3rd row. For a second, Maya thought she'd imagined it. Then he said, "This keynote isn't about innovation. It's about what happens when we let people grow beyond their worst moment. That's where the real work begins." Silence. Then thunderous applause. But Maya didn't clap. She just breathed. Deep, measured, full. Because something inside her, some long-locked place, had just loosened. And suddenly, she wasn't afraid of their history anymore. She was just present. for the man he was now, and the woman she had become, after everything. The night after the keynote, Zurich exhaled under a drizzle that never quite turned into rain. The city shimmered in dampness, wet cobblestones glowing gold beneath the streetlights, shadows lengthening and folding into themselves as couples wandered past bakeries already closed for the day. Maya didn't return to the apartment right away. Instead, she took the long way home, through the quiet part of the old quarter, past the bookstore with the hand-painted window and the cafe that always left 2 chairs out overnight, as if waiting for ghosts. Her heels clicked softly against the stones, and her umbrella stayed folded in her hand. She welcomed the cold, the mist, the air that tasted like questions. Back home, William had returned before her. He hadn't texted. She hadn't called. It wasn't distance. It was space. And in this story, the one they were building, it mattered.
Mattered.
He was sitting at the edge of the couch when she came in, his tie undone, his blazer tossed over the back of a dining chair. The kids were already asleep. She could tell by the hush, by the scent of lavender and clean sheets lingering in the hallway. William stood when he saw her, but didn't speak. And Maya didn't rush to fill the silence. She strolled into the room, setting her keys down, then her bag. Her hair was damp from the fog, curls gently frizzing at the edges. She looked tired, not like someone who hadn't slept, but in the way of someone who had carried too many truths in one day and had nowhere to put them down. He waited. And finally, she sat beside him. Still no words, just the soft weight of her presence beside his. She pulled her knees up slightly, wrapping her arms around them, resting her chin against the side. "I listened," she said, her voice quiet but firm. William turned his head toward her. "I know. I didn't expect you to say any of it. I didn't know I could until I stood there." Maya nodded slowly. There was a beat. Then she asked, "Do you remember the first night we met?" He smiled, caught off guard. "Of course I do. You were wearing that blue dress with the sleeves you kept adjusting. And you were late. By 23 minutes. I had a flat tire. You had no excuse. But you brought flowers," she said, lips curling into the ghost of a grin. "They were wilted. They were violets. I didn't know what I was doing. Neither did I." They sat in that memory for a while, the version from years ago suspended between 2 glasses of wine and a broken elevator that had made them climb 4 flights of stairs together. "I was scared back then too," Maya admitted, her voice softer now. "Scared that loving someone meant handing them the power to break you." William didn't interrupt. "So when you left, it didn't shatter me the way people thought. It confirmed what I already believed, that people leave, that loving them is never enough to make them stay." She paused, swallowed hard. "But watching you now, watching you stay, it undoes something. It unlearns something in me." William turned to her fully then. "I don't want to fix the past," he said. "I can't. And I won't ask you to forget it. But I want to live a life that earns your present." Maya blinked. "I want to raise our children with you," he continued. "Not just pick them up from school or read bedtime stories. I want the hard parts too. The sick days, the scraped knees, the math homework that makes us both feel stupid." Her eyes watered, but she didn't look away. "I want to be there when you get the big promotion, or when your research hits a dead end. I want to be the person you rant to at 1 a.m. over cheap red wine and toast." Her breath caught. "And I know I'll screw up," he added. "But I won't run again." She studied him, the man she once loved in a way that felt like breath itself. The man who broke her, the man who returned, and the man who, in every way that counted, was still learning to stand beside her without needing to be forgiven to feel worthy. Maya reached for his hand, not out of instinct, out of choice. And in that moment, something shifted, not in words, but in weight. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with grand declarations, but with quiet certainty. They didn't kiss. They didn't say I love you. But when she leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek lightly against her curls, something real settled between them, a breath, a belonging, not perfect, but present. Later that night, after she changed into a soft cotton shirt and tiptoed past sleeping children, she found William still awake, standing at the window, watching the rain that had finally arrived. She joined him, folding her arms gently. "Zurich feels quieter at night," she murmured. "It does," he agreed, "but not lonely." She turned to look at him. His gaze was steady. "I'm not asking for promises," she said, "just honesty." He nodded once, always. And with that, she leaned her head against his chest. There were no vows. No plans are carved in stone. But their silence held something sacred. The kind of quiet that only comes when two people have nothing to prove, only everything to share. Sunday mornings had become rituals in the Hartman Bennett home, not in the ceremonial sense, but in the soft, ordinary way that lives intertwined without force. There was no alarm clock, only the slow stirring of limbs beneath comforters, and the scent of warm cinnamon drifting in from the kitchen. Ezra was the first to rise that day, dragging a plush dinosaur by the tail as he wandered into the kitchen, where William stood in pajama pants, flipping pancakes shaped like stars. "You made them lopsided," Ezra declared, arms crossed. "They're artistically abstract," William replied with mock seriousness, inspired by the Cubist period. Ezra squinted. "They look like clouds that fell. Even better." From the hallway, Maya listened, one hand resting on the doorframe, her smile quiet and unspoken. She hadn't expected mornings to feel like this again, not heavy with silence, not stiff with unspoken things, but simply breathable. The others joined gradually. Aaliyah, with her sketchbook still clutched under one arm, and Zion, who insisted on reciting a space trivia fact before breakfast. Today's topic was Europa, the icy moon with hidden oceans. The kitchen became a chorus of chatter, clinking forks, syrup drizzles, and a jazz record playing low from the living room. Somewhere between pouring orange juice and brushing hair out of Ezra's eyes, William caught Maya's gaze across the table. She looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. And for the first time, that look didn't carry the weight of everything they had survived. It took the warmth of everything they were becoming. Later that day, Maya took the triplets to the park while William stayed behind, rearranging boxes he hadn't opened since moving in. It wasn't that she asked him to do it. It was that she'd made room in the hallway closet, and without a word, he understood what that meant. Not just physical space, but belonging. He found a small wooden box near the bottom of a taped-up bin, half covered in bubble wrap. Inside was the ultrasound photo, the only one he had. 3 tiny shapes, hardly distinguishable. He remembered holding it once in the Atlanta apartment, before fear turned him into someone he no longer recognized. Back then, he hadn't seen it as life, just pressure, just a consequence. Now it felt sacred. He didn't cry, but his throat tightened in that familiar way, something between grief and grace. He placed the photo in the top drawer of the nightstand, not hidden, not displayed, just there, as it should be. That evening, the wind shifted again. Spring in Zurich often played tricks. Sunlight in the morning, rain by dusk. Maya and the kids returned damp, with muddy sneakers and cheeks flushed from laughter. William met them at the door with towels and warm socks. Dinner was simple. Leftover soup and fresh bread, the kind Maya liked from the Turkish bakery near the tram stop. The kids told stories between bites, each interrupting the other, and at one point, Aaliyah insisted everyone go silent so she could read her poem about trees that whisper things you can't hear until you're very still. When they'd all gone to bed, Zion under a planet-printed duvet, Ezra curled up with his dinosaurs, and Aaliyah whispering to her imaginary forest friends, Maya lingered in the hallway, listening to the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence she had once feared. Now, it felt like exhale. She walked back into the living room, where William sat with his laptop closed, a cup of mint tea forgotten beside him. I was thinking, he said without preamble, about moving my office. Out of the guest room? No, he said, eyes meeting hers. Out of this apartment. Into an actual place, a few blocks away, with a real lease. Maya tilted her head. Is this your way of saying you're staying in Zurich? It's my way of saying I'm not going anywhere you aren't. She blinked, and something in her chest unfurled. Not surprise or relief. Just rightness. I like that, she said, sinking beside him. They didn't talk much after that. The kind of day they had didn't need many words. The next morning, Maya awoke to find William already gone. On the kitchen table, a note. Meeting the realtor at 9. Left extra pancakes on the stove. Tell Ezra they're still lopsided. She smiled. It wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. Weeks passed. The days folded into one another like pages in a well-read book. Not perfect, not glossy, but true. Missed appointments, temper tantrums, forgotten grocery lists, and bedtime stories were cut short by exhaustion. But there were also new routines, shared responsibilities, and moments. Quiet, sharp, unforgettable, where their hands found each other across chaos and stayed. One Friday afternoon, as Maya walked into the apartment after a long shift at the hospital, she heard music. Not from the radio, from the living room. Aaliyah is playing the keyboard. Zion is humming beside her. Ezra is building something beneath the coffee table. And William is reading aloud from a picture book, halfway between drama and complete absurdity. Maya stood in the doorway, frozen by something she couldn't name. And then she realized. This was it. Not the ending, but the chapter where the characters finally stopped running from themselves, where they stopped mistaking love for sacrifice or silence for strength. She walked toward them, slipped off her coat, and sat down at the edge of the rug. William looked up, smiled. She didn't need to say anything. She was already home. It happened on a Tuesday, not a holiday, not an anniversary, just a Tuesday, washed in overcast skies and the smell of spring coming too early. A day no different from the ones that came before it, except for the quiet revelation that filled the room like sunlight. They had arrived. Not at the end of the story, but at the beginning of the part they never thought they'd get to write. Maya was sitting on the balcony, legs curled beneath her, a blanket draped across her shoulders. Below, Zurich moved at its usual rhythm, efficient, understated, beautiful in a way that never demanded attention, but always deserved it. William stepped outside, 2 mugs in hand. He handed one to her without a word. She didn't need one. The silence between them had changed. Once filled with absence and ache, it now carried familiarity, depth, warmth. a language only the two of them could speak. "I signed the lease today," he said finally. She turned to him. "The office?" He nodded. "It's small, too much light, terrible parking. But it's yours." He looked at her. "Ours." Maya smiled, her eyes glinting with something that had nothing to do with sunlight. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" "Every day," he replied honestly, "but I'm not running from it." There was a long pause before she said, "Neither am I." And that was it. Not a declaration. A decision. The triplets were growing fast. Zion had started writing letters to astronauts. Aaliyah had filled 4 notebooks with poetry about clouds and old buildings. Ezra insisted he would be a scientist, chef, pirate, and had recently started conducting experiments with tomato sauce. Their world was loud, messy, and tender. And Maya no longer braced herself for William's absence. He didn't disappear when things got hard. He stayed through tantrums, late-night fevers, dentist appointments, and zoning meetings at preschool. He stayed when Maya was too tired to talk, and when her hands trembled after long surgeries. He stayed, and not once did he ask for forgiveness for yesterday. He showed up better today. One evening, as they tucked the kids in, Ezra, half asleep, head heavy on William's shoulder, murmured, "Is Daddy staying forever?" William looked at Maya. She didn't answer him. He said softly, "As long as you want me." Ezra didn't reply. He was already dreaming. But Maya heard it, felt it. Not a promise etched in stone. A truth lived out in real time. Years would pass. Not perfectly, but full. There would be new challenges. Grief, growth, choices they'd have to make again and again. But never alone. They would fight, and laugh, and build. They would stand in doorways and wonder who their children had become. They would get older. And still, when he looked at her, he would see the woman who never stopped becoming. And she would see the man who learned how to stay. Mom. Their love wasn't built on the sparks of romance or the poetry of chance. It was built on what came after, the raw, unglamorous, breathtaking after. The kind of love that gets back up, that unpacks boxes without being asked, that makes room in the closet, folds the laundry, and whispers, "I'm here," when the world gets too loud. The kind of love that doesn't chase the happy ending, because it lives in the middle of the mess and says, "This is enough, and I'm not going anywhere." And maybe that's the real story here, not one of reunion, but of reckoning, of 2 people who dared to return, not because they had to, but because they chose to, again and again, even when it hurt, even when it was inconvenient, even when the fear was louder than the hope. They stayed. They learned how to love each other and who they had become in the time apart. And in doing so, they created something more substantial than time could ever undo. A family, a rhythm, a home. If you've made it this far into their story, maybe it's because something in you understands it, has lived it, feared it, or hoped for it. Love like this isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just someone showing up, over and over again, even on a regular Tuesday. If this story touched you, let us know. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and follow our journey for more stories like this one. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary stories are simply the true ones.